What does a 19-year-old English major, a Russian serf, an Indian pacifist, and a Ukrainian anarchist have in common? They're all big fans of one of the world's most famous authors, Count Lev Leo Nikolaevich Tolstoy. Tolstoy was one of not only the most famous Russian authors of all time, but is often considered the greatest author of all time in any language. This literary giant is far from ideologically exclusive, since his writings have been admired throughout the ages by the full spectrum of political, religious, and social leaders of the 20th century. He was the hero of simple Tsarist serfs. He was personal friends and an inspiration for Mahatma Gandhi. He was touted by the Soviet Union for both social and linguistic achievements, as well as the opposite spectrum, as he was a major inspiration for the anarchist movement in Ukraine. But the man and the myth can sometimes be hard to separate, especially since even Tolstoy himself couldn't entirely separate the truth of his person from his ideals in many of his works. This is especially true in his magnum opus, War and Peace. So while I'm in Russia, I decided I had to seize the opportunity to strike while the proverbial kettle is hot, to discover what I could about the man for myself. I didn't just want to read his books or see his plays, I could do that anywhere. I desired to walk where the man walked, to see what he saw when he was gathering inspiration for all these amazing stories. And so that's exactly what I did. Just 2 hours south of Moscow is a city called Tula, which is the historic armory of Russia. And it's a city I also visited on this trip, but it'll be in a separate video. And if you keep heading south beyond Tula about 20 extra minutes, you'll arrive at the most scenic and beautiful fall imagery I've ever had the pleasure of seeing in Russia. This is the Tolstoy estate. Tolstoy was actually born, raised, and eventually buried here. And the first thing I was struck with was the sheer length of cars parked on the side of this little country road. We had to park at least a mile away from what our map told us was the border of his estate because of the popularity of this place. And we even went on a weekday. Once you get to where all the buzz and energy is, just outside of the gates, you'll encounter a little shopping center that, if you do only one thing here, it's not visit the Tolstoy house, it's visit this area. Not just because of all the delicious and interesting knickknacks from Tula that's around, but inside this area, there is the single most delicious thing I have ever drank: birch sap kvass. Now, regular kvass is a drink enjoyed in many Slavic countries. It's kind of like a beer, it's fermented with bread and raisins, but it's not fermented for very long, and it's often drank even by kids because the alcohol content is almost nothing. But the amazing thing is that this isn't made with bread, but instead with birch tree sap. And it's flavored with raisins, raspberries, strawberries, and even pine cones. And you can only buy it here, so do not skip this.
Здравствуйте. Здравствуйте. Есть возможность продегустировать эти квасы, понять, что это такое, и это бесплатно.
Now, after we bought 4 liters of the stuff and I was forced to walk a mile back to stick it in our car, we finally walked across the street to our first site of Tolstoy's legacy, the Tolstoy Schoolhouse. This has to be one of the prettiest places I've seen in Russia so far. One of the most prolific authors of all time, considered one of the most famous authors of all time, walked where I'm walking and lived right there, in that house. This is amazing. During Tolstoy's lifetime, the serfs, a sort of slave class with slightly more rights, were mostly illiterate. And this man who wrote so many now beloved children's stories wrote them not for his nieces or nephews, but for the instruction of serfs so that they could get an education which he viewed as a human right. He established the first 13 schools for serf children in Russia on his property, with this school being the site of one of them. On top of that, this school is the first model of all democratic education in the whole world. Right here in rural Russia, circa 1861. Already a true forerunner and visionary of the 20th century. After that, we headed to the ticket booth, which I know is ironic, because Tolstoy wanted to leave his estate to the people of Russia. But since that's not a good excuse to tell the security guard at the gate, we decided to grab a pair of 200 ruble tickets and head on to this giant and beautiful estate. And I'll leave you with one bonus travel tip here: buy the Tolstoy house tour here at the gate. If you want to go into his actual house, you'll need to buy this ticket, and you can only buy it here at the gate. And since the house is quite a bit far into the property, I don't want you to have to walk all the way back to the gate like I had to. So don't say I didn't warn you. Tolstoy's horses. What does that mean? I don't know. Probably the guy that runs the horses, but he lives here. Since no filming is allowed inside any of the buildings, I'll just have to say you'll have to encounter it yourself. But what I can do is tell you what I learned about Tolstoy, and he was actually a funny character. He was a count of Imperial Russia, which made him a landowner, owning many ancestral serfs along with his land. But he always viewed himself not as their superior, but an equal. Even after desiring to free them, his wife is actually the one who refused to allow it, as she sorta had become used to the lifestyle of a countess. But that didn't stop him from growing in his radical lifestyle. As he aged, he dressed only in peasant clothes instead of the traditional and typical imperial style that counts wore at the time. He even refused to live in his giant house after a certain time, instead insisting to live amongst his serfs as one of them, laboring how they labored and living how they lived. He was a non-preachy vegetarian, which is a lesson I think the 21st century can learn, encouraging people to take up vegetarianism, but never requiring it. All of this and more garnered for him great respect from many serfs, not just of his own, but all around the country. In fact, many liberty and egalitarian schools of thought are indebted to the great writer, including anarchist, Christian, pacifist, democratic, as well as abolitionist and nonviolent protest movements. This isn't even to break the surface of his linguistic contributions to the modern Russian language or his sociological insights in his massive collection of works.
It's easy to get lost in your thoughts when you're looking around.
Finally, after a long life of facing war, injustice, and the immorality of the Russian imperial class, Tolstoy had grown weary of his life at home. Near the end of his life, he famously ran off after his wife became unbearable to deal with in her jealousy of his fame and his desire to leave his estate to the Russian people. So he boarded the first train he could south, where he continued the entire time to preach to the local people riding on it about his ideas of love, of nonviolence, and Georgism, which is a radical form of anarchism mixed with social responsibility. He caught a cold on that train, and he died shortly after on the 20th of November 1910. He was 82 years old. There was a funeral parade after his death that was flooded by thousands of peasants on the streets, just looking to send the educator of their children off to his final voyage. And that place that he was sent off to was our final stop in the Tolstoy estate, Leo Tolstoy's gravesite.
Everything that we're seeing in pictures, all the stories we're learning about the people, it's like the same reason when we go to a museum, you see someone's clothes, you go, wow, that guy really wore that. And it's like really cool. This is the vessel that the person that did all of that lived through it. His whole life, every experience, every event. He changed his clothes. He never changed his body. So everything he did is right there in front of you. It's really cool.
That's so deep.
That's why I love seeing graves so much.
You can get there by going past all the buildings and fields into the woods on the backside of his estate. And a little while after, you'll see a sign that points the way. Further into the thickening woods, they established a zone of silence around 100 meters around the gravesite. This is for the pilgrims to the site, allowing everyone an increasingly conscientious and contemplative moment for self-reflection. When, finally, out of the quiet nothingness, there he was. This man who was a titan of literature, history, politics, all the gods of the 20th century, is lying before me in the same place I'll soon be. The man whose shoe no one has filled since his passing has been made not only equal to all men in this life, but is frankly lying uneventfully in front of my feet. There's no giant statues, no glorious monuments, not even flowers. It's just him. And I think that's honestly how he would have wanted it. A quiet place for him to finally rest from a life of struggle. Finally, no more war, only peace. The Tolstoy estate gave me a sense of the profound commonness of great men. How even the ones who write the books that shake institutions come home to wives that yell at them for their choice of clothes. How the personal friends of revolutionaries fought against a system he found unjust not by grabbing a rifle, but by building a school. Tolstoy, even with all his controversy and hypocrisy, has influenced the 21st century in more ways than I even thought of before I came here. And not least of all, I think the thing I took away from here the most was how no matter how right or wrong one's opinions, how great the book one makes, how influential their time on Earth was. They'll too end up on a nice hill overlooking the autumn trees. With that, I think it's time I take a moment to enjoy the view while I have the eyes to see it, and to continue my work to do the most good I can do with the gift that life has given me, and in the circumstances that they have been given to me. Have a good week, everyone.